over the world. And now that we've got our virtual delegates back online, they'll be able to participate and take part as well. So first, I'd like to invite Robin Robertson to the stage if she's not already on the stage. Robin Robertson will be my co-moderator for this expert panel. So there will be a real live person there for those of you who are in person, and that will make this a truly hybrid experience for everyone. Most of you already know Robin because she's been president and CEO of the Traffic Injury Research Foundation for many years, and she has very deep and diverse experience in many areas of road safety. Robin and I actually met more than 2 decades ago, and we are now working together along with Mavis Johnson and Rob Wilkerson and others on ways to assist communities with the safe system approach through a new Action to Zero tool, which will contribute to what Tran was talking about earlier about new ways of looking at road safety and new ways and good old ways to implement different types of interventions during this next decade of action. So when I couldn't come in person at the last minute, Robin kindly stepped in. So thank you very much, Robin. So next, we are very fortunate to have a panel of international road safety leaders and experts. And these are truly the leading people around the world. One of the benefits of having a hybrid conference. We were able to have the top people in their fields and in their regions speak to us directly in Canada and to ask them questions, no matter how far apart we are. So first, as a reminder that you can submit your questions if you are an online delegate, a virtual delegate, through the Q&A function on Zoom. And for everyone who is there in person, please get ready to, at the end of all of the presentations, you'll have a chance to come up to the microphones that should be placed in the aisles down there to ask your questions directly to all of our excellent speakers and experts. So for our very first panelist on this panel about the International Status Report on the Decade of Action, we will start right here at home in Canada for an update about Canadian efforts. And we will have Ms. Valerie Smith, who is the Director of Programs at Parachute Canada, speaking on behalf of herself and Raheem Dilgir. Valerie has been at Parachute Canada as a director since 2014, and she is in charge of the programs and campaigns and all of the networks focused on road safety. She's a strong Vision Zero advocate and has held a number of previous positions as well, focused on youth and health promotion, international development, and her background is actually in international comparative education, where she has a master's from the University of Toronto. So I'm very pleased to welcome Valerie, and she will be talking about taking action, Canadian perspectives for the Decade of Action. So please join me in welcoming Valerie. Thank you, Valerie.
Wonderful, thank you. Thanks, Bella. We're just getting queued up here. Okay, thank you so much, Bella. I'm getting some feedback up here. I'm very lonely up here. I've lost Raheem, I'm not Bella, Robin sitting over here. But really nice to see so many of you, and this is my first time presenting in person over 2 years, so very excited about it, and looking forward to seeing it over the next few days as well in person. So I'm going to be providing some insights on the global decade of action for road safety, and I'm going to do it a little broadly at first, touching on some of the pieces that the panel already did, and then I'm going to bring it down to the Canadian level and for some of the work we're doing. Okay, so who are we? So Parachute is Canada's national charity that our key strategic priorities is road safety. We work with partners across the country to promote evidence-based interventions and approaches that not only help make our roads safer, but also help make them more functional and accessible for all road users with a focus on vulnerable road users. Can you guys hear that feedback?
Yeah, we're working on it.
Okay. And who's CARSP? So as you all know, Raheem is supposed to be here today. The whole production with me, we didn't want me to.
Keep going.
Okay, I'm quite loud. So Raheem is supposed to be here with me today for presenting our president of CARSP. And CARSP is a national member-based association dedicated to enhancing road safety, not just at home, but abroad. And you're actually, at this conference, you're going to hear about some opportunities for us to be working internationally, globally, and potentially with some of our partners overseas. CARSP also supports Canada's road safety community by providing access to multidisciplinary information, research, and networking opportunities. Okay. So every year globally, over 1.3 million people die in preventable road crashes. And it's estimated that a further 50 million people are seriously injured. It's forecasted that without serious action on our part, road crashes will cause an estimated 13 to 17 million more deaths and 500 million more injuries within this current decade. So as a response to those overwhelming numbers, in the fall of 2020, as we heard earlier, the UN General Assembly proclaimed 2021 to 2030 the second global decade of action for road safety, with the target of at least a 50% reduction in traffic deaths and serious injuries. So the global plan that I'm going to be talking about quite a bit today, and we'll hear about over the next few days, is a strategic document that really helps to guide countries in the rollout of the global decade of action for road safety. We heard earlier it was developed in 2021 by the UN and the World Health Organization. This is a great visual. I've used it in a number of presentations. And what it does is it tells us what we want to do to help achieve the metrics and the targets set out in the global plan, how to do it, and who does it. And what I want to draw your attention to is on the left side, you see the safe system approach. And already you've heard it a number of times, and Dr. Nhan did a really great synthesis of the safe system approach. And we really like that it's clear and in the global plan. Because as a number of you know, in Canada and elsewhere, we've really been advocating as road safety practitioners and NGOs for a safe system approach in our work in Canada. So what is needed for the plan? So again, Dr. Tran touched on this, but because some of the Zoom participants might not have seen it, I'll go through it relatively quickly. So what we see in the plan is a strong focus on multimodal transport and land use planning. And why is this? This is because in by 2030, we're expected to see about 70% of the global population living in urban areas. So we really need to start thinking about how we're going to use our roads differently. There needs to be an investment in public transport, which we know is safer, more sustainable, equitable, and an efficient mode of travel. Safe road infrastructure. So as we know, road infrastructure must be planned, developed, and designed, and operated to enable multimodal transport, including public transport, but also walking, cycling, and now we're looking at e-scooters and other e-transport. We need to work hard to eliminate and minimize the risk for all road users with a focus on our vulnerable road users. We also need to consider the needs of gender. People living in low-income communities and understand hotspots and ensure equitable access to road design interventions. To really getting our interventions to the people who need it. Vehicle safety. So vehicles should be designed to ensure the safety of those inside and outside of the cars. Safe road use. So road user behavior, as we know, is greatly influenced by a number of variables. road infrastructure design, enforcement policy. So there's a need for us to focus on more than changing individual behavior, even though that is a very important piece of the work we're doing. Post-crash response. So we'll hear quite a bit about this as well in the global plan. And this is most important in our low-income communities and low-income countries, where stronger, appropriate, integrated, and coordinated care needs to be established for post-crash response. So who's involved in the global plan? Government. So government's a big piece of the work on the global decade of action, the global decade of action for road safety. Really calling globally on our policymakers to start making more change around our road systems and how we're building and using our roads. In Canada, we're going to be hearing about government action at the municipal level. In urban and rural communities, we're going to hear about it at the provincial level and at the federal level. Civil society and government. So in this global decade compared to the last one, there's a real call for a better integrated collaboration between NGOs, academia, researchers, public health, and road safety practitioners with the government. So working very closely together to help achieve some of the goals. We heard Dr. Tran talk about the very important role the private sector plays, not just in funding and supporting the work we're doing, but in how our vehicles are being made and how roads are being designed. Funders and sponsors and United Nations agencies. So what is the current situation in Canada? So road traffic fatalities are still a very big problem. That's why we're here today, with huge economic and human costs. In 2020, 1,749 people were killed on our roads. That's our last set of data. Disproportionately affecting our children, youth, and our seniors. That number of deaths and injuries has cost our country over $3.6 billion a year in the economic burden. So what's happening in Canada to support the global decade of action on road safety? And that's what I'm going to focus a little more on. And you will be hearing, if you haven't heard already, you'll be hearing a lot more about this during the conference. So we know the decade was launched globally in the fall of 2021. Since then, Parachute and CARSP have been working together with our partners, our friends at TIRF and other organizations, as well as the Global Alliance of NGOs for Road Safety. We have Lotte here today. You're going to hear her in this panel to raise awareness amongst Canadian stakeholders on the global decade of action for road safety. A lot of people have no idea what it is. They have no idea what the global plan is. There's a lot of people working in government that have no idea what it is. And so our goal is to try to get everybody talking about what it is and understanding how they can use it in their own work. We've been aligning our messaging with global partners and conducting webinars to inform and educate stakeholders on the global plan. Not just what it is, but again, how they can use the global plan to mobilize their road safety work, to mobilize their policymakers and other stakeholders to help roll out the plan. Working under the leadership of the Global Alliance, Parachute works closely with the input of our national partners to help develop a regional plan with the United States that looks more closely at an action plan contextualized to Canada. This document will help shape our work in Canada and the USA. And it's really focused on three principles pulled directly from the plan. Commitment to funding at all levels of government, NGO involvement in all levels of decision making around how the decade of action is being promoted and rolled out in Canada, as well as the role of evidence-based intervention. So coming back again to safe systems and Vision Zero approaches. So at this point, the call to action is a 2-page document that's going to help guide some of the work that's happening in Canada and the United States. However, we need to bring it down to a more micro level in Canada. Sorry, the print's quite small. So we are working to start to flesh it out in Canada and draw out some achievable metrics and targets to develop a Canadian strategy. And again, this will be one that connects directly to the global plan. It connects directly to the work happening across the world, but it looks more specifically at Canadian metrics and targets. If anyone here is interested in learning more about this, you can come and chat with me or Brenda. We've also been engaging the federal, provincial, municipal government and legislators on the plan and in collaboration with CARSP. When the plan was first launched, we issued a letter to our federal minister on the launch of the decade, and we've been having multiple discussions with the Federal Transport Office of the Minister. Really trying to encourage for us more representation at the United Nations Heads of State meeting that's happening at the end of June 30th and July 1st. Will be promoted live on United Nations television. Again, I can help provide any of these links. We've also been doing outreach to all our provincial and territorial ministers of transport to ensure that they know about the global plan decade and that they understand how they can connect to it and engage with it. And we continue our work again with many partners on embracing and endorsing Vision Zero. Okay, so a little bit specifically about what Parachute has been doing. So we know that road safety improves when we reduce motor vehicle traffic through strategies such as improved access to public transit, dedicated bike infrastructure, walkable and more connected communities. For instance, changing our urban built environments and encouraging walking for transportation positively impacts not just our physical activity, but our mental health, chronic disease. We also know that active transport supports the efforts of our peers working in sustainability and climate change. Because of these ongoing intersections, and again, Dr. Tran spoke of it today, we felt there was a need for us to work outside our silos, work outside our boxes of road safety and public health, and we brought 25 organizations together in 2021 from those different sectors. We coordinated a series of roundtables called the Change for Good Roads Initiative. And I'm doing actually a presentation at 3:30 specifically on that collective. But what it really speaks to is the need to start working with groups outside of road safety if we want to achieve some of these big numbers, because the folks in climate change, the folks working for sustainable green spaces, they have very similar agendas, and we all need to be working closely together. We will continue to work with our national partners on Global Decade campaign. So this was one that happened in May. It was led by our peers at the Global Alliance of NGOs called Commit to Act. You're going to hear a lot about the efforts around speed reduction from 40 to 30 in urban residential areas. This is a big part of the global plan and a feasible metric that we can really start working towards in our cities and rural areas and dense areas. Parachute will continue to work with our partners on Vision Zero support. So continuing to work with municipalities and provinces on Vision Zero in road safety planning, and continuing to highlight profile Vision Zero jurisdictions and share learnings and evidence-based resources. And on that note, this is a slide that Raheem dropped in. Both TAC and Parachute will be releasing a report in the next few weeks. Ours is called the Canadian Landscape on Vision Zero. And what we've done is we've interviewed and researched the 30+ municipalities that have adopted or are adopting Vision Zero. And we've created a very extensive report on how they've done it, what the challenges are, how they've overcome challenges, and a lot of really great learnings for cities around safe systems approaches. TAC has also done a similar initiative, so we're hoping that they complement one another. And on that note, as you can see from this slide, we are seeing movement around safe systems approaches in Canada. TIRF's doing some great work, as we heard from Bella, around helping communities understand the road to Vision Zero and how to get ready for Vision Zero and safe systems approaches. So between 30 and 34 municipalities in Canada have developed or are in the process of developing a road safety strategic plan which embraces Vision Zero and safe systems. And that wraps up my presentation. Thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to hearing the other presenters.
Thank you very much, Valerie. It's always good to start with the host country for CARSP. So I neglected to explain before we started that because this is an international look at the status of the Decade of Action around the world. We're starting with Canada. We will go on to have a presentation about Europe and Africa together, and then about Latin America and the Caribbean, and then about the US, since they're our neighbors to the south, and very closely aligned with Canada because of the North American region. And then finally we'll end with Australasia. So just so that you know how the globe, how we're going to be going around the globe in the next hour. So next, it is my distinct honor to introduce Dr. Chika Sakashita, and she is the Research and Accountability Director for the Global Alliance of NGOs for Road Safety, which is really the alliance that all the NGOs around the world working very hard on road safety belong to and are working to implement the Decade of Action activities. You might have seen on the program that you saw Lotte Brondum as the speaker, and that is Dr. Chika Sakashita's colleague, and they collaborated on this presentation. But unfortunately, because of all the aviation cancellations and problems in transportation, she was unable to do this live. So thank you to Chika for being willing to take her place and do the other part, do the entire presentation yourself. So just to give you a little background, in addition to being a director at the Global Alliance of NGOs, I've known Chika for quite a while. She comes from Australia, and that's where she lives, but she's presenting today from Europe. I believe she's in Helsinki, if I have that right. And so it's evening there now, and she has a great deal of experience in all areas of road safety delivery, from government to academia to nonprofit. She's been a very sought after advisor and consultant to many different entities such as the World Bank. So today she'll be specifically focusing, she'll be speaking from her role with the Global Alliance of NGOs for Road Safety, but you should know that she's also the managing director of the great Journal of Road Safety, which is the official journal for the Australasian College of Road Safety. And Chika today will be speaking specifically about the activities in Europe and Africa. So I will turn that over, and thank you very much for joining us, Chika.
Thank you so much, Bella, for that very kind and generous introduction. And hello to everyone. I have to send the message from Lotte. She was really looking forward to participating herself and presenting at this important conference, but unfortunately she got stuck in cancellations, etc., as Bella has said, and I've had to step in. So I'm sorry for those of you who are really looking forward to hearing from Lotte directly, but I hope that I can do her justice and present the message and to contribute to the panel discussion as well as she would have for all of us. The Alliance is really honored to be invited, and so thank you very much for the invitation. I will share my screen now. Can you see my screen? Bella, if you can, yep, okay, great. So, all right. So in case some of you may not be familiar with the Global Alliance of NGOs for Road Safety, we thought we'd give you a brief overview of what we're about. So the Alliance was established in 2011, just when the first decade of action started. It was in response to demands from the group of NGOs, and it was established by a small number of NGOs who are members of the United Nations Road Safety Collaboration, so that we can strengthen the voice of NGOs around the world and really push for road safety advocacy. So we exist here to mobilize and empower NGOs from around the world to, act together and to make roads safer for all road users and advocate for the rights of victims. And in the, we had our 10-year anniversary last year, and in these 10 or so in the 11th year, we've grown to have 302 members from 100 countries, and Parachute being one of our valued members. And the Alliance Secretariat has also grown to meet the needs of our member NGOs. So our work is very much focused on supporting and empowering our NGOs and equipping them to be the best NGO that they can in their respective countries. So in the areas that the NGOs have needed support and more of the networking is in, so our work is very much focused on networking and knowledge sharing, advocacy and accountability, and capacity building for our member NGOs. Now, the Alliance is very much committed to the global plan, and we've already heard from Nhan a great outline and the in-depth analysis that has gone into it and the rationale behind it. And the civil society or the NGOs are a well-acknowledged partner of delivering the global plan for the Decade of Action. And around October, when the global plan was launched, the Alliance at the Secretariat, we did some in-depth sort of reflections and thinking about, okay, what can we learn from the last decade? So the last decade of action, we also had a 50% death reduction target. But as we saw in that figure that Nhan has showed, in the past decade, we didn't see a reduction. In fact, the number of deaths rose and the death rates remained pretty stable. And we're not seeing the reducing trend, let alone the 50% reduction. So we have this target again that we need to achieve by 2030. So we don't want to repeat the same mistake. And so this is why it was really important for us to really do a helicopter view of what was not quite right in the last decade and what can we do better? So, and how can NGOs contribute to that goal? And there were three key things. One thing we believe is that we know what works. There's been a lot of body of knowledge that are accumulating to show us that there are a lot of interventions out there that will result in reductions in deaths and injuries, but we're not seeing the implementation of it. We're not seeing the uptake, the extent that's required to reduce the number of deaths and injuries that we are suffering every day around the world. And then second is the funding. We don't see much of the money being prioritized to deliver road safety. And not only that, when road safety does get funded, it doesn't get spent. It often doesn't get spent on things that actually do deliver the death and injury reductions. It goes into other things, more of the general things, and trying more about the fixing the humans, like road safety education, road safety awareness and sensitization, and not so much about the real solutions that exist that are changing the systems to protect all the road users. And related to that, when we think about the crashes and the deaths and the injuries occur, we tend to still, many of us still think, okay, what can we do to change the humans. And instead of asking the question, what could he have done differently to the system to prevent that death and injury from occurring, even though a crash may continue to occur because humans are prone to errors and human bodies are vulnerable to energy crashes, as we have heard from Nhan today. And I really like the way he really highlighted about how we ask the questions. And I think if we don't ask the right questions, we're not going to get the right answers. And sometimes innovative solutions is achieved through changing the questions, changing the mentality, and that's the safe system thinking. And even though we have seen the road safety community embrace the idea of safe system and Vision Zero, which is fantastic, it is still not yet mainstream and it is not actually seen in practice. So this is where we believe that NGOs can step in, because a lot of the lack of evidence-based interventions, the lack of funding for the right thing to reduce deaths and injuries, and continuing to blame the road users instead of thinking about how can we improve the system to protect our road users. That shows a real deep level of lack of political will. And also the NGOs are here to catalyze a political demand, a political will, and we can also incentivize and amplify the community demand for a safe system that will protect us so that we don't have to be killed or seriously injured while we're using the transport system. So I want to share now a video that showcases this message in response to the global plan. So let me share here with you. So that's our message from us, NGOs, in support of the global plan to deliver the 50% reduction target. And this, if you want to see more in detail, we have published this work in the Journal of Road Safety. So if anyone's interested to learn more about it, I'm happy to send you the paper. Now I will go more deeply into the Africa and so Africa and Europe, because that is what we have been asked to present on. So just a snapshot on where Africa is in terms of road safety. It's the least motorized part of the world, yet it is the place where the number of road deaths is the highest, the rate of deaths is the highest. And it's 26.6 per 100,000 population, according to the WHO estimate, which represents 16% of the world's deaths. And we've seen that a lot of the road systems are being developed, especially ignoring the needs of our pedestrians and cyclists. And 44% of fatalities in Africa are pedestrians and cyclists. And if we include motorcyclists in this, it goes to 53%. It accounts for 53% of fatalities. A child in Africa is twice as likely to die on the road than a child in any other part of the world. And it's costing more than 3% of the GDP in Africa. And talking about the lack of political will and really focusing on the personal responsibility rather than the system responsibility, some examples of the challenges that we see in Africa. So these are the challenges that have been identified through our consultations with our Africa regional members. So in the lead up to the global meeting of NGOs for road safety, which was held in March this year, we've held regional consultation meetings with each of our regions, and this is the kind of things that we have learned and assessed to really highlight what is more like an accountability check exercise, and what is it that we need more of from Africans decision makers to deliver road safety. So there is the African Union, who has really done a great job in preparing the African Road Safety Charter. This is a great start, but it does need 15 countries in order to have full ratification, that is a legal status, to make those signed countries an obligation to deliver on the African Road Safety Charter. But unfortunately, only 9 countries, even though this charter was prepared back in 2016, still we're in 2022 and only 9 countries have ratified. So it's really still showing a lack of real political will. There are national road safety strategies in some countries in Africa, and they do tend to show what are consistent with the global recommendations. However, when it comes to the implementation, we see that what is outlined in those road safeties strategies, it's not being funded. And when we look at the actual, what is it that they're going to do, we see that they are not really aligned with the safe system approach. And we see a lot of focus on road safety education, road sensitization. And so really, again, going back to the old thinking of putting the responsibility onto the road users instead of thinking about what is it that the African decision makers, the government decision makers can do to provide a safer system for the road users, the people in Africa. And we've seen that 44%, despite the fact that 44% of the deaths suffered in Africa are vulnerable pedestrians and cyclists, and when we include motorcyclists, more than half of the deaths, we see that the infrastructure projects is not really addressing the vulnerable road users and providing an infrastructure for those vulnerable road users. And instead, we're just building roads that are serving cars and without putting in the proper safety measures. when such safety measures do exist, and fundings can be put to that, and it is doable, and we know how to do it. And then we have some lead agencies, which is one of the big recommendations for the World Bank to have an effective road safety management. However, there is a weak coordination and the accountability of these lead road safety agencies remain weak. And then there is not much involvement of civil society. There's not a really great enabling environment for NGOs to participate in the decision making. So we do have a lot of NGOs in Africa, but it's, it is a two-way process with NGOs and governments, and NGOs are trying to get into that space, and this is a place where there's a lot of room for improvement. And in terms of data, so not only evidence-based, actually implementing evidence-based interventions, but in order to have a real effect on reducing deaths and injuries, we have to make data-driven decision-making. So where are the deaths happening, and where do we target our limited resources to target those places where there are deaths and injuries occurring? And we do have the African Road Safety Observatory, which is very exciting and established in 2018. So that is a big start for Africa, and I think that is something that we really need to leverage in the coming decade, so that we can do better data-driven decision-making and target the evidence-based interventions that we already know of, that we can put in place to reduce the deaths and injuries in Africa. So this is a picture from South Africa, and it's Kelvin. He is in a wheelchair, as you can see, and he's commuting to work in a wheelchair on the road. And you can see in the picture that it might be too small for you to see, but it's a 60K speed limited road. So he's mixing with cars, and you can see that the path next to it, it's not paved, it's not smooth like that's been made for the cars. There's no smooth pedestrian path that's usable for a wheelchair. And this is the only route for him to be able to go to work and to make a living. And it's 60K. We know that for vulnerable road users to be able to survive in a crash, the speed limit has to be 30 or less. But he's commuting and mixing with 60K or more of these vehicles, and he actually says it's not that if I get killed, he will get killed one day. And we're bringing this up because it highlights that lack of the safe system, lack of prioritization for vulnerable road users and the way that the roads are developed. That road looks pretty advanced, so there was money there, yet it was prioritized over to move the vehicles faster, when in fact, most of the road users in Africa are pedestrians and cyclists, mostly for walking, and that is how children go to school, people go to work. And like we heard from Nhan in Vietnam, that's often the only choice, transport mode choice. They have no other choice. So why aren't we providing a system that allows everyone that equitable aspect that Nhan was also highlighting for us? And one of our powerful NGOs, Carol Smith, she has been advocating wonderfully and effectively in South Africa. And this is one of the recent things that she has instigated a peaceful protest. And it was only a few days ago that she ran a peaceful protest along the side of the road with all the walkers and the children and mothers and skateboard riders to advocate for reduced speed limits and better pedestrian facilities. So we heard from Valerie, Canada has had its own regional call to action, and similarly, Africa developed its own. This is really highlighting what we have just learned, and also calling for that evidence-based interventions, the investment, and involving NGOs. And you can see more of the detail of what the Africa vision is calling for, African NGOs are calling for, so that we can deliver the 50% reduction by 2030. So I'll just read one quote from it, but you can find more in detail if you want to find out on our website. So we call on our governments in Africa to implement or guarantee accountable, well-resourced, and empowered road safety institutions that are responsible and capable of managing all necessary road safety elements, and which coordinate with other governmental authorities such as ministers of health, transport, infrastructure, and education in order to reduce road fatalities and serious injuries by 50% by 2030 and guarantee people's right to safe mobility. In fact, on Tuesday, I will be presenting at the one of the sessions, 5B, I think it was, road safety in LMICs, and I'll be showcasing a little bit more on the work in Africa. So if you're interested, please come by. Now going to Europe. So Europe is on the other end of the scale. If we compare all the different regions, Europe is the best performing region. But still, it is 9.3 per 100,000 population. It's not zero yet. And we know that this Europe region includes Sweden, who has led the way in Vision Zero. So it hasn't reached zero. And there is a mix of high-income countries and middle-income countries, and there's quite a bit of a disparity in the road safety performance of 5.1 versus 14.4 per 100,000 population. And road crashes are the leading cause of the young people who are, growing up to become a economically productive member of society. And unfortunately, road crashes is one of the killers. Those people who are about to, reaching to show the full potential of their life, and we are losing them when they're between 5 and 29. So it is a really tragic cause of death for many young people. WHO has, in the last global status report in 2018, have highlighted some of the good practice recommendations in 5 areas. So doesn't meet good practice in drink driving laws, doesn't meet good practice in speed limit laws, child restraint laws, seatbelt laws, and helmet wearing. And only 5 of the 51 countries in Europe meet that good practice. So it's, there's still a lot of room for improvement. Again, this is where we come back to, we know all these evidence-based interventions, but the uptake, the implementation is still very, very weak, even in these Europe region where it's supposedly the best in the world. And the funding for the full implementation of the national road safety strategies. So there's a lot of national road safety strategies, but again, the funding, it's lacking. When it comes to the money, it doesn't get into the get spent on the implementation, where it actually is going to result in a death and injury reduction. So in terms of what is Europe doing, it is a more promising sort of environment. The environment is very ripe, and there's a real potential, exciting possibility that Europe can lead the way and be a model for the world in terms of achieving Vision Zero. So now the EU Road Safety Policy Framework 2021 to 2030 has a target of 50% reduction in fatalities, and not just fatalities, but they now have included serious injuries as well by 2030. So that's a big step up from compared to the last decade. And they are also committing to Vision Zero by 2050, which is fantastic. And we heard from Nhan and Valerie about the looking for more of those co-benefit of opportunity with focusing on sustainability and seeing it as a package. And we see that Europe is really focused on sustainable mobility. And for example, the Sustainable Smart Mobility Strategy calls for 5,000 kilometers of cycle network, and cities like Paris, Berlin, and Milan are going to hopefully lead the way in terms of providing safe cycling infrastructures that will not only address the road safety issue, but also the other challenges that we face, like climate change and equitable transport and affordable transport. And the EU mission, 100 climate neutral and smart cities, that's also another commitment to make 100 of the cities climate neutral. And this is acknowledging the fact that even though about like 4% of the whole of Europe are cities, 75% of the European people live in cities, and it is one of the biggest carbon emitters. So this is a great leadership from the EU to commit to creating more climate neutral and smarter cities. And they are also aiming to focus on prioritizing interventions that will actually meet the 50% reduction in death and injuries. So that is some of the things that involved in that is aligning the national legislation to international best practice. And really the 30K push is strong and is being more, that kind of sustainable transport system is more prevalent in some European cities. But we need to see more of them. Enforcing the compliance with the regulatory frameworks, and there's a lot of role that the vehicle regulation can play a big role for talking about the system. It's not just the road infrastructure, but how we can change the vehicle framework and the regulation framework. And this is where Europe is also leading the way. Improving the way roads and urban space and public transport are being designed. There's a lot of push for encouraging more public transport use and by making it more affordable, more accessible, and more integrated with walking and cycling, so that way of active non-motorized transport becomes an attractive choice for all the people, and making mobility a lot more equitable thing. And also, obviously, improving the data collection and the sharing systems. And so Europe has also come up with its own call to action. They say, we call on all governments in Europe to commit to act for people's right to safe mobility and a 50% reduction in road deaths and injuries by 2030 through implementation of evidence-based interventions that put people at the center, protect our children and their right to life and education, safeguard the environment, and promote equality and inclusion. Safe mobility is our right. And again, you can see more of the detail on our website. So this is where I will end my part, and I'm sure Lotte will be very pleased to hear from you. Her email is lotte.brondum@roadsafetynGOs.org. And apologies again on behalf of Lotte that she wasn't able to join. But thank you again for giving us this opportunity to give a voice to our NGOs.
Thank you so much, Chika. That was a very full and interesting presentation. And I think that that leads perfectly into the next one, which is from my longtime colleague and friend, Dr. Lucien Jones, who is presenting today from Jamaica. And Dr. Jones is a physician, and he's the vice chairman of the National Road Safety Council, which is chaired by the actual Prime Minister of Jamaica. And he's been in this role since 1995 and has been responsible to the Jamaican Parliament for the reduction of road traffic injuries island-wide. He has a great deal of experience. We have met all over the world on issues of road safety. And as you can tell, with this road safety work, it gets personal. It's much more than just a job. It's it's something we really take to heart. And I think that Lucien exemplifies that more than anyone. So he will be presenting on the decade of action in Latin America and the Caribbean. So I will turn that over before we, for any more ado. So thank you so much, Lucien, for taking the time to do this today.
Okay, bonjour, mes amis, comment allez-vous? And with that, end of my high school French, I will move right into my presentation very quickly. Okay, thanks very much again. And first of all, I want to say thanks very much to CARSP for inviting me to speak at this conference this evening. In another life, when I was president of my Medical Association of Jamaica, I visited Canada and here just to show some memories of the past. Also, I was in your wonderful country in the very cold Christmas, and here my wife and I are about to go up on the CNN Tower. Thanks very much to Bella, lifelong friend who I met in 2007, way down in Chile. Here's a picture of her in Puerto Rico in 2007. So this is what we're talking about, Latin America and the Caribbean this evening. And I'm going to be very brief because we're going to leave time for questions and answers. It's an area of the world that has over 600 million people. In terms of road safety, it is not doing well. We are at 19 per 100,000 people. That is fatalities. And the number of injuries is largely unknown because we don't have the kind of industrial surveillance system consistently as we would like to have. The other big difference, of course, is the income disparity with other parts of the world. You in Canada will well know that your GDP per capita is just about $48,000 US. The GDP per capita in the Latin American Caribbean region varies a lot, but the average is just a shade over $7,000 US. In my country, it is $4,500 US. It's a slide to show what used to happen in 2030 when road injuries was way down at number 8. Fast forward now to 2020, and you see that the number of people who are dying because of road injuries is now at the top of the list. And therefore, this means that the Latin American and the Caribbean region will have to take very seriously this matter of the second decade of action for road safety and what WHO, UN together, they are calling for. A slide also shows that we have different areas of the Latin American Caribbean region. There are different levels of conformity to seatbelt wearing, for example. And of course, the Latin American region is not one solid region. There's the Andean South, there's Mesoamerica, which is mostly Costa Rica, Mexico area. There's the Latin Caribbean, and there's a southern cone. We have Brazil and Argentina and Uruguay. In terms of what is happening in the Latin American region, to be precise, this is a slide coming from the Ross Institute, World Resources Institute, sorry, which is a well-known institute which is involved in many other things apart from road safety. And they're reporting that in Mexico and Chile and Colombia, for the decade, they are focusing on legislation, using legislation to drive reduction in road safety. In Mexico, interestingly, based on Nhan's presentation, they have now introduced a law which would give safe mobility, parliamentary and legal enforcement, and that will lead to other things. So perhaps Nhan, we all need to take a page from the Mexican experience and really enshrine safe mobility into the parliament and into legislation. In Colombia and also in Chile, they're also introducing legislation to ensure that they have a central area where they can monitor what is happening on the roads and also to make sure that the safe systems approach is part of the legislative framework. Apart from that, hearing from Nani Gonzalez, who is an NGO head in Uruguay, the same story of what is happening in Africa obtains in the Latin American region, and in my country, Jamaica, also in the Caribbean. There has been a surge of motorcycle imports, and therefore a surge of those people who are dying, so-called vulnerable road users, those the pedestrians, the pedal cyclists, and the motorcyclists. In terms of what is happening in my country, Jamaica played a very important part in the launch of a global plan for the decade of action for road safety. You will see where my Prime Minister, who is a chairman of the National Road Safety Council, was the feature speaker. And if I had the time, I would show you the video with him, encouraging people worldwide to pay attention to this very important public health and development issue. The one thing I'd say that is important for road safety to be placed at the highest level of government. It is useful, of course, to have NGOs and to have other authorities taking care of road safety. But when you have a Prime Minister, you at least have the potential, if not the actuality, of road safety being placed at the highest level of the country. Of course, there are competing priorities, and therefore one has to be there advocating for road safety, just as in another country. But it makes a big difference when you have your Prime Minister. This is our Prime Minister. I just spoke to at the launch of the global plan for the decade of action. And of course, there are other speakers, including Zuleika Mandela, with whom we have a close association. Myself and Bella and Zuleika have traveled the world promoting road safety. Just to give you an idea, we have a meeting with the Prime Minister coming up next month. And this is the agenda action for the meeting. Of course, like many other countries, we are focusing on legislation to get in a ticketing system, the deterrent system right. We are looking at a new Road Traffic Act and the use of cameras. We have an action plan already to reduce motorcyclists and to reduce pedestrian deaths also. A big problem in our country is that we have a lack of injury surveillance. We have an emergency response team, but many countries across the world are grappling with the same issue. How do you report on a regular basis in the same way that we get a report every morning for fatalities? We need to have a consistent report for injury surveillance, because it gives you perhaps sometimes a better idea of what is happening in your country. And also, of course, the question of cost. And of course, the matter of the UN Global Plan is very much on the agenda for action when we meet with our Prime Minister. This is a slide showing that we were doing fairly well up to 2012 in Jamaica. And thereafter, the graph has been going in the wrong direction. So for example, last year, 487 persons died in road accidents, compared to 260 in 2012. And therefore, the decade of action, in our experience, was not a good one. And we therefore have to look at different ways of how we are going to deal with road safety between 2021 to 2030. It's a slide showing one major issue. It shows the cost of road traffic crashes in 2014. But Jamaica faces another issue. And a big problem in our country is crime and violence. And therefore, you have to be competing with money being allocated to fighting crime and violence, which is among the highest in the world, unfortunately, very sadly. And this is one of the challenges that we face in middle and low income countries. Just an example of somebody rushing to the hospital having just met in a crash. The category of road users in 2013 showed a heavy part of that being the cars, and a small part of it being the number of people who are dying riding or driving rather motorcycles. This has changed dramatically in the last 10 years or so, as you look on this slide. For many years in Jamaica, pedestrians was the main road user who died on our roads. Now it's the motorcyclists. So we have taken action. We have been working with the Global Road Safety Program to promote speed enforcement in our country, which is a major, major problem in road safety. We are very mindful of the data coming from WHO that a 5% reduction in average speed can translate into 30% reduction in the number of road fatalities. So we are focusing on helping our police, and therefore we recently had a speed enforcement webinar. Many policemen who are involved in traffic attended. We are also trying to make sure that we have electronic ticketing. We are moving from a paper-based system, which are subject to corruption and inefficiencies. And so we are working with the Ministry of Transport and also the Ministry of National Security, who are in charge of the police, to make sure that we have a better system. And it's just an example of the equipment that the police will have when they issue a ticket. So they no longer write per ticket. It will be done electronically. We're also working very closely with the FIA Foundation, and we have signed a recent agreement to start a helmet coalition project. And the aim is to really create the environment in which we advocate for and bring together private sector. Namdo spoke about that, the importance of private sector, government, NGOs, and other sectors, to try and ensure that those who are riding motorcycles wear a helmet. Over 80% of the fatalities among motorcyclists are there because people are not wearing helmets. And this is a recent visit from a FIA Foundation person, along with the minister who has been assigned to work with us, just to discuss the project and to promote it. I close with one request to a Canadian audience, and of course, international audience. One of the major problems with the last decade, and this was mentioned already, was the lack of funding. There's a Global Road Safety Fund. Our Minister of Transport is going to the UN on June 30th, a couple of weeks' time, to try and convince countries that they ought to put more funds into this road safety fund. It will make a huge difference to those who live in middle and low-income countries to have access to funding if we are going to come anywhere near close to achieving 50 by 30, which is the hashtag for the target set by the UN and WHO. I want to encourage continued partnership between Jamaica and Canada, that when my minister goes to the meeting at the UN, the Canadians and the Europeans and other countries who have richer countries than we have can make a significant contribution to the Global Road Safety Fund, so that we in the Caribbean and the Latin American region can have access to funding, which will help us to meaningfully contribute to the target that the UN has set, 50% reduction by 2030. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucien. Perhaps it's because he's a physician, but he always seems to be able to combine the science and the personal side. So we really appreciate that perspective. And as Lucien indicated, it's really important to have all the different sectors involved. And this panel is not only a combination of different regions of the world, but it's a combination of different people from different disciplines, as well as different sectors. So we've heard from the NGO Alliance. We've heard from Lucien, who is both public and private, since he reports to Parliament. And our next speaker will be Rob Ritter, who is the director of the Office of Impaired Driving and Occupant Protection at NHTSA. But first, let me thank Dr. Lucien Jones, my friend and colleague, one more time for his wonderful presentation. So thank you, Lucien.
You're welcome.
And before I move on, I did also want to mention that with the NGO Alliance that Chika was speaking about, there are Canadian members, as she mentioned. So in addition to Parachute CARSP, your very own Canadian Association of Road Safety Professionals, as well as MAD Canada. So there is participation in from Canada in the NGO Alliance already. So now moving over to a government representative, the U.S. government. Now we're our neighbors down south. We're very happy to have Rob Ritter here, and he is very sort of humble bio says that he works to reduce the incidence of alcohol and drug impaired driving and increase seatbelt use and child safety use and reduce distracted and drowsy driving. But he's really the go-to person on the safe system approach at NHTSA and many other different topics. And I actually first met him when he was at the Federal Highway Administration, where he was the managing director of the Office of Innovation Program, or Innovative Program Delivery. And he has over 25 years of experience in many different areas of transportation. So we're really happy to have you here, Rob, and I'll turn it right on over to you. So thank you.
Thank you, Bella. I appreciate it. If you could just confirm that you can see my screen and I'm sharing the right one so that we can move right along. I appreciate it.
Yes, perfectly.
Excellent. Thank you so much. On behalf of all my colleagues at the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the U.S. Department of Transportation, I'm really pleased to share this virtual stage with the panel today to talk about the next decade of action on road safety. We recognize the urgent goal of preventing road crashes both here and globally. And in the United States, we have a national roadway safety problem. Roadway fatalities declined consistently for 30 years in the United States, but that progress stalled. And over the last few years of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have been quickly losing ground as fatality rates have started climbing. In the last decade, roadway incidents represented the vast majority, almost 95% of all transportation fatalities in the United States. And in 2021, there was a 10.5% increase from the previous year, which itself was a 7% increase above 2019. And while we were in the various stages of lockdown due to the COVID-19 pandemic and VMT decreased across the board, fatalities went up. And now, as we return to normal driving activities and VMT, our fatalities continue to go up at an alarming rate. You can see in this slide that the experience in the United States has been very different from our colleagues all across the world. Many countries saw a decrease in fatalities as VMT went down in 2020, given the lockdowns associated with COVID-19, but that's not the case in the United States. So our 2021 early estimates are 42,915 people died in motor vehicle crashes in the United States. Again, up 10% over 2020. It's the largest number of projected fatalities since 2005 and the highest percentage increase that we've seen in our data record keeping. Our Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, recognizes this as a crisis. And you can see the quote from the first half of 2020, and unfortunately the first half of 2021, and unfortunately the situation did not improve in the second half of 2021. NHTSA immediately began to actively gather, synthesize, and analyze internal and external traffic safety data during the COVID-19 public health emergency to understand what was happening in our country. And just to lay some context of what's going on, this was surprising and unusual for us in the United States. During a normal recession or slowdown, we would see a decrease in VMT, an increase in unemployment, and that would result in a decrease in alcohol and other impaired driving and other risky driving behaviors, which would then translate to a decrease in fatalities. At the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw the the decrease in VMT and increase in unemployment, but those risky behaviors did not go down, in fact went up. And at first that meant the fatalities were staying flat. But as the pandemic continued and that experience continued, fatalities have increased at a rate we have not seen before. And so as we look forward to the decade of action and seeing what's happened in the first couple of years of the decade, the Secretary has called this a public health crisis and developed our national roadway safety strategy. This strategy is consistent with the goals of the decade of action and will bring together work done across the US Department of Transportation and put forth a comprehensive set of actions to significantly reduce serious injuries and deaths on our nation's roadways. As Secretary Buttigieg notes, while the department has an important leadership role to play in addressing this crisis, it will take concerted and coordinated effort across all levels of government, as we've heard from our other speakers, the private sector, and communities to reverse our current trend. And if we are to meet our goals, we know we need to work side by side with other governments and international organizations. Let me tell you a little bit about what's in our national roadway safety strategy. And again, you can see the parallels to what we've heard about the decade of action. It outlines the department's comprehensive approach to significantly reducing serious injuries and deaths. It's the first step in working towards our ambitious long-term goal of reaching zero roadway fatalities. This is the first official acknowledgement by the US Department of Transportation, setting a vision and goal of zero for the United States. It formalizes that goal and DOT's adoption of the safe system approach principles to guide our safety actions. It identifies new priority actions, makes changes to our existing practices and approaches, and targets solutions with the most substantial impact. And it leverages a once-in-a-generation investment in safety and infrastructure recently passed by our Congress, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. It also advances our equity and climate goals and recognizes that we cannot do this alone. So part of this effort, we call on our partners, stakeholders, industry, and the American public to action to solve this crisis together. Safety is the department's top priority. And as I said, it won't be solved at the federal level alone and globally by any one nation alone. Our strategy calls for efforts at all levels and recognizes the need to share our experiences and to learn from other countries. It's also important to note that safety is the foundation to the success in our other priorities. Safety is essential to advancing equity and to fighting climate change. So the US adopts the safe system approach with all of the principles that I think you are all familiar with, and we've heard from some of the other speakers. Deaths and serious injuries are unacceptable. Humans make mistakes and are vulnerable. Responsibility is shared by all parties. We must be proactive and develop a redundant system. You've seen this cycle, this pattern, this example and graphic of the safe system approach before. You're all familiar with it. It is the foundation that underpins our global implementation with focus on all of the elements: safer people, safer vehicles, safer roads, safer speeds, and effective post-crash care. We must learn from each other and act together to make progress towards our ambitious targets, and the United States is committed to doing that. Internationally, we can benefit from the collaboration, and we recognize the importance of CARSP, of the international community, the United Nations, and other parties in promoting the safe system approach and the decade of action, and we look forward to working with you. The safe system approach includes all of these elements. I think you're familiar with these, and in the interest of time, I will go through very quickly, but recognizing that we need to continue to educate all road users so that everyone has the opportunity to travel safely, regardless of how they travel. But we also need to recognize that the entire system needs to protect those people who are using our system as well. Responsibility is shared by everyone. We must design roadway environments to mitigate those human mistakes that we know will occur and are often predictable, and account for the injury tolerances. We have to encourage safer behaviors, and the roads can help do that. And we need to facilitate safe travel by the most vulnerable of our users. We have to expand the availability of vehicle systems and features that help to prevent crashes and minimize the impact of crashes on both vehicles and non-vehicle occupants. And the United States recently released our plans and invited comments on improving our national, our NCAP program, which will help drive the industry to creating additional safety features in our vehicles. And we are working to slow people down. Speeding endangers everyone, the driver, occupants, and other road users. And one of the risky behaviors we saw during the last 2 years is tremendous increases in speeds and increases in tremendous speeds, people driving over 100 miles per hour. So we are working to continue to educate the public on the dangers of speed, on what happens at higher speeds and the injury tolerances associated with the human body at different speeds. And we will be launching a new comprehensive national speed campaign starting next month. And finally, post-crash care. Even with the improvements in all components of the safe system approach, roads, vehicles, speeds, people, traffic crashes will still happen. And a comprehensive and integrated post-crash care system can further reduce fatalities and serious injuries. So we're working with our emergency communication systems, first responders, training emergency medical services personnel, emergency departments, trauma centers. In the United States, 40% of deaths from traffic crashes that occur after the arrival of EMS at the crash scene. And we think there's a tremendous opportunity to improve that survival rate. All of this is based on research, which we continue to conduct to understand the driving context, behavior, experience, and to develop and evaluate countermeasures to reduce fatalities and serious injuries. And all of it is based on data. Our National Center for Statistics and Analysis at NHTSA provides a wide range of analytical and statistical support. Federal Highway Administration provides highway statistics series containing information on motor fuel, vehicle registrations, driver's licenses. Our Motor Carrier Safety Administration provides data on large truck and bus safety. All of this information is available and used to help inform the countermeasures and activities that we will be engaging in moving forward. And we have a robust communications and education campaign at the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, working to educate all road users who share responsibility for safety. All of these campaigns are available at trafficsafetymarketing.gov, the website you see on the screen here. And we encourage you to take a look and consider sharing some of these communication tools that we use. They're available in the United States to all levels of government, advocacy groups, and safety partners so that we can coordinate together on these campaigns. And I also want to mention the new bipartisan infrastructure law that provides the resources that will bring the National Roadway Safety Strategy to life. It provides more than $14 billion in new funding for road safety, including $6 billion for a new Safe Streets and Roads for All program. This Safe Streets and Roads for All program provides the funding and resources that are necessary for local communities to develop comprehensive safety action plans and then to implement some of the activities in those plans. It provides more than $4 billion added to our safety programs and another $4 billion to provide for improved data collection, vehicle safety programs, and truck safety. The Safe Streets and Roads for All grant program is key to supporting our actions in the National Roadway Safety Strategy and achieving the goals in the strategy and reaching the international goals for the Decade for Action. As I said, it supports local initiatives to prevent deaths and serious injuries to supplement and complement the state initiatives that have been funded for quite some time here in the United States. As I wrap up, I want to take a moment to highlight our long history working with our colleagues in Canada to address important road safety issues. We're proud to be actively engaged in work with the Global Road Safety Forum and the World Forum for Harmonization of Vehicle Regulations. We share experiences and expertise on impaired driving issues, on vehicle safety, child passenger safety, and many other areas. Thank you to our colleagues in Canada, and we look forward to continuing to work with them and the global community and contributing to and learning from international research and best practices. It's especially important as we learn from each other, as we look at the nexus between the Decade of Action and other UN Sustainable Development Goals, including climate change and equity. We know that the needs for clean air and access to healthcare are intertwined with the need for safe mobility. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. This is an example of, good government and, good government people. So thank you for that. And I know that there are some of those same, your counterparts in the audience today at the CARSP conference. So we really appreciate your coming and presenting on that. I think that as you can see this, we're kind of in an exciting time right now for road safety because we have all of these different elements that are coming together all around the world through Safe System, through Vision Zero. So, it's a good time to act. So thank you again to Rob Ritter for that presentation. I'm going to move now to a short video presentation by Dr. Ingrid Johnston, who is the the Chief Executive Officer of the Australasian College of Road Safety. And she's new to this position, but she has a long time experience in climate work and health as well. So I'm going to encourage you during this time, during the video, to, if you need to, get up and stretch while you're listening. Ingrid wouldn't mind, I know, and while her video is going, and prepare your questions, which Robin Robertson, my colleague and co-moderator, will be taking from you as soon as Ingrid's video is done. So thank you. And I think Ingrid is coming. While we're waiting for the video to come on, I'll let you know that Ingrid Johnston, she is collaborating with CARSP, as part of the Australasian College of Road Safety. And, she's sorry she couldn't make it because of the time difference, but she did send this video. So I think it'll start soon.
Johnston, the CEO of the Australasian College of Road Safety. And I'm really pleased to be here today. Thank you so much to Brenda and Bella for asking me to present to the Canadian Road Safety Conference. I'm going to provide a bit of an overview of what's going on in Australasia on the Global Decade of Action for Road Safety, focusing on the national strategies in Australia and New Zealand. So the Australian new National Road Safety Strategy for 2021 to 2030 was released on the 22nd of December 2021 at about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I will leave you to draw your own conclusions around the timing of that release. The strategy follows the previous 10-year strategy, which failed to achieve its targets. It aimed for a 30% reduction in fatal and serious injuries and achieved a 22% reduction in fatal, but serious injuries actually increased. So it has a similar starting point to the global plan in an explicit recognition of failures of the past, including implementation failure, and the need for stronger accountability and clear performance measures. It recognises the need to build institutional capacity, stronger governance, transparency and accountability. The targets in the national strategy aim for a 50% reduction in fatalities and a 30% reduction in serious injuries by 2030. So you can see that immediately the strategy is out of step with the global plan. There is a mechanism to review the injuries target in 2025, hoping to increase the ambition. And it should be remembered that it comes on the back of serious injuries having increased in the previous decade. The plan in Australia is centred around a safe systems approach, although it's noteworthy that we have a federated system, and one of the new plans in one of our states, Queensland, recently released, moves away from a safe systems approach slightly. But the national plan is definitely grounded in a safe systems approach. It adopts a movement in place framework and a social model. The social model it describes as involving how we can reach beyond traditional transport agencies to leverage broader sectors of the community to improve road safety. And that road safety is not solely a government or transport problem. So it includes system and public policy approaches, community approaches, organisational approaches, interpersonal functions, and individual functions. However, it's not immediately clear how that will translate in Australia. We have a national preventive health strategy that was just released that makes no mention of road safety. There is no injury prevention strategy, and our 2021 infrastructure plan does not attempt to cover road safety. So there's not a good starting point for integrating road safety across other portfolios. 9 priority areas have been identified in Australia's National Road Safety Strategy. One of the key features of the roads in Australia is that 75% of the total road length, or about 660,000 kilometres worth, are locally controlled roads. They account for about 36% of all kilometres travelled in Australia, but over 50% of casualty crashes. If you're travelling on a road in a very remote area, you are 11 times more likely to be killed than if you're travelling on a road in a major city. The focus on vulnerable road users is reflective of the movement in place framework and the increasing focus on improving systems and infrastructure for pedestrians, cyclists, and increasingly e-scooter riders as well. Heavy vehicle safety is important in Australia, which is a country still quite dependent on road for its freight, and 18% of deaths on our roads involve a heavy vehicle. Vehicles as a workplace is an area of increasing focus. It's been found that 62% of workplace fatalities in Australia involve vehicles in some way, but this is under-recognised by the national authorities responsible for workplace health and safety. And the focus on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders reflects the fact that they are 3 times as likely as non-Indigenous Australians to die in road crashes. There are several enabling actions to achieve the aims, and there is a focus on improving serious injuries data, including a project to link hospital data with crash data. There is a data sharing agreement which has been negotiated between the Commonwealth and the states and territories, and again you'll understand in a federation how difficult that can be to achieve. And the social model is being used for cultural change. There is an outcomes framework with a set of performance indicators, and the baseline data for the primary outcome indicators is going to be a 3-year average of 2018 to 2020 figures. The strategy recognised specifically that these indicators are aspirational. At the time the report was released, not all the data are currently available, and it notes that ongoing collaborative work will be needed to establish appropriate indicators, definitions, and to explore data sources that will allow measurement. The strategy says there will be a review and analysis by the Australian Parliament and the National Office of Road Safety of the successes achieved by 2025, but there aren't details of what an evaluation might look like. And there is a National Road Safety Data Hub, but little detail on how to improve and ensure data quality. So, what's happened in Australia since the release of our national strategy? Well, unfortunately, we still don't have an action plan. It is going to be months before it will be completed, not helped by the fact that we've only just had a federal election. But it means that it is likely to be about 2 years into the 5-year action plan before it's actually released. Some of the states and territories have their own strategies and accompanying action plans, but there's not an alignment of the timing or necessarily content of the plans and strategies across the country. And we've had one federal budget since the strategy was released, and there was very little in there for road safety. So unfortunately, to date, not a lot of actual concrete progress. Time will tell. So what about in New Zealand? Their National Road Safety Strategy for 2020 to 2030 was released in December 2019. So pleasingly, it was released before it was due to begin. It has a vision where no one is killed or seriously injured in road crashes. There is around 94,000 kilometres of roads in the network in New Zealand, including 83,000 kilometres of local roads and 11,000 kilometres of state highway. In the 6 years before this strategy was released, deaths and serious injuries increased, disproportionate to traffic growth. Fatality rates in New Zealand are higher than in other developed countries. So this strategy has begun with the recognition that there is a lot of work to do. But it has been designed in conjunction with other activities and strategies going on. For example, the New Zealand Transport Agency have a mode shift plan to support public and active transport. There are improvements to freight and passenger rail and plans to improve the health and social participation outcomes of older people. So there are good connections across. There are strategies in New Zealand's targets of a 40% reduction in deaths and serious injuries by 2030. So this puts New Zealand's strategy also out of alignment with the global plan. However, the previous strategy in New Zealand had no targets at all, and the targets in the current strategy were developed through modelling on how the targets would be achieved and the investment that would be required. This modelling found that just over half of the target deaths and serious injury reductions could be achieved through a combination of infrastructure improvements, targeted speed limit changes on the highest risk parts of the network, and increased levels of enforcement, requiring increasing investment in road safety by 25% over the next decade, from $800 million per year to $1 billion per year. It found that another quarter of the target could be achieved by lifting the safety performance of the vehicle fleet, and the remaining quarter would be achieved by a combination of other interventions. There are guiding principles to New Zealand's strategy, which is based on the safe systems, but these principles are broadened for the strategy. And the idea is to guide participation and decision-making across the system through developing a shared understanding of what is trying to be achieved. The 7 guiding principles are promoting good choices but planning for mistakes, design for human vulnerability, strengthen all parts of the road transport system, have a shared responsibility for improving road safety, actions are grounded in evidence and evaluated, road safety actions support health, well-being and livable places, and we make safety a critical decision-making priority. There are 5 focus areas for the strategy, which will be mapped out in a series of action plans over the decade. They are to improve road safety in cities and regions through infrastructure improvements and speed management, significantly improve the safety performance of the vehicle fleet, ensuring that businesses and other organisations treat road safety as a critical health and safety issue, encouraging safer choices and safer behaviour on roads, and developing a management system that reflects international best practice in leadership, coordination, engagement and accountability. There is an outcomes framework for New Zealand's National Road Safety Strategy with indicators to measure progress, intervention indicators, safety performance indicators and outcome indicators. And in a similar situation to Australia, it was recognised that not all of these could be monitored when the plan was released, and it therefore noted that identifying the appropriate mechanisms to fill the data gaps is our first priority. So what's happened since New Zealand's strategy was released? Well, first off, there has been a significant and concerted effort to advertise the strategy. This campaign has been highly visible and successful in getting the Road to Zero and the Vision Zero to become part of the conversation in the New Zealand community. And that's been really important for bringing the community along in conversations around such things as reducing speed limits. The initial action plan for 2020 to 2022 had 15 actions categorised by the 5 focus areas that I described earlier. There was a report released in October 2021, which was an independent review of the road safety investment and delivery. It looked at how road policing activities and safety infrastructure investments are prioritised, delivered and monitored. And it found an alignment between the strategy and focus in police and transport agencies, including a recent resetting of previous arrangements to achieve safety outcomes. It found a good understanding at senior management levels, but a need to improve consistency of delivery. Implementation problems are often the way, and a lack of performance data and evaluation across the system at granular level, including financial measures. The Road Safety Partnership Program government agencies responded a few months later with confirmed actions to respond to the findings and recommendations. In August 2021, the first annual monitoring report for 2020 was released. It found that during 2020 there was work to develop new data collection and analysis mechanisms, and 3/4 of the indicators were reported on in the first year. The report outlined progress on particular actions. A significant piece of work has been around speed management and a new setting of speed limits rule, which is more directive and has targets for safe speeds around schools, 30 km/h zones in urban schools, and there is an expectation of 40% compliance by June 2024 and 100% compliance by 2027. A new speed management guide will accompany the legislation. It is far more aligned with the Safe Systems approach, moves away from a risk-based approach with historic crash data to a principle-based approach, including movement and place, with a hierarchy depending on the road type and assumed speed limits that can only be made higher if certain criteria are met. For example, only a divided road can be 100 km/h or higher. So that is a really quick overview of what is going on in Australia and New Zealand for the global plan of action for the decade of action on road safety. Time will tell what impact it has. Thank you very much. Enjoy the conference and stay safe.
Thank you. I wanted to give one last thank you to those of our speakers who were able to stay on, and to say that CARSP has made a donation in your name to the Young Road Safety Professionals Committee as a small thank you. So I will now turn it over to my colleague and friend, Robin Robertson. And thank you again, everyone.
Go for it. Keep yours muted for me if you don't mind. No, on the computer. Thank you.
They can hear me?
It should be good now. Yeah, it's
Muted on here. Can you hear me, Bella?
Now we can.
Oh, good. So I can have to say something else. I was talking about you. I was saying our trip around the world. This wasn't really what I had in mind, but this will do for Sunday afternoon. So thanks to Robin, Chika, and Lucian, and Ingrid, and you for putting together such an interesting panel. So we have a few minutes for questions. A lot of information today from all the different countries. So did anyone have questions for us? Okay. Can you introduce yourself to the speakers now?
Sure.
Yep.
York Regional Police. I have two questions. I'll ask one, and then there is the others. I'll continue. But the first one has to do with speed. Obviously, as a police officer, I deal with it a lot. My question is, in regards to stakeholders and looking at ways for the symptoms as opposed to or not symptoms of the underlying actual issue. Have we ever looked at why or looking at how vehicles are manufactured, the speed capability beyond what our roads are designed for, and the entirety in opposition of safety for drivers and all vulnerable roads? Why do you make vehicles that can do 200 kilometers or miles an hour and then expect them not to be on the road?
Who wanted to start? I know, Rob, you guys are very engaged with the regulations as our colleagues Transport Canada here in the room.
Sorry, Robin, would you mind repeating the question because our audio is a little bit bad for the panelists?
So the question was from a York Regional Police Officer with respect to speed and why vehicles are designed to do such very fast speeds relative to how highways are designed. And I know it's a very difficult topic because we have lots of drivers who like to speed. So has there been any conversation with respect to vehicle manufacturing and their role with respect to safe speeds for vehicles on the roadway?
I guess, Robin, I can start. I don't have a lot to say on the subject. So we do have a manufacturing industry in the United States that produces these vehicles. We at NHTSA do establish motor vehicle safety standards. And there's appropriate use of the vehicles and in a number of different ways. And we do expect everyone who uses the system to use it properly, safely, and within the bounds of the system itself. I hear you, and I think in certain circumstances we have had a number of conversations about appropriate speeds and potentially speed limiters or intelligent speed assist. These are systems that are certainly available and starting to be researched and discussed. In the United States, we've had more discussions on those systems specific to our commercial motor vehicles. So I think that will continue to be a topic of conversation, and it's something I think we all need to look at and consider when we're thinking about the safe system approach. But there are a lot of concerns, needs, values that need to be balanced when we're making these decisions, as opposed in terms of how we regulate the vehicle design specifically.
Right, and I think to your point, Rob, I know one of the things that we've talked about is educated road users as well. We have, and it's very similar with distraction. We have drivers who want to speed. We have drivers who want to use their phone while they're driving. And in the absence of regulation, limiting across the board, vehicle manufacturers are kind of stuck between what the consumer wants versus what's safe. And consumers aren't necessarily going to go out and buy a vehicle that they can't speed or they can't use their phone. So I think part of it is vehicle regulation, as Rob said, and they're making progress in Europe with respect to intelligent speed adaptation and new technology. But I think the other balance is educating road users about some of those choices as well. While we wait for regulation. I think it's an 8 or 10-year process. Paul, I'm going to ask you, Mike. Yeah, okay, it's a long process. Okay, other questions? Across the room here.
You stole something. I just want to follow up on that comment because it's an excellent comment. I don't really want to I don't really have a question. But Rob, you mentioned the word values, and we've talked about values. So if your value is safety, that's the most important value. So let's not wait even 10 years and implement some of these technologies.
Okay, and I guess maybe I'll throw one question to all of our panelists in terms of, so what Nhan talked about in terms of, are we asking the right questions? And where we are with respect to making progress for the next decade of action, where do you see the greatest opportunity in the next few years to really make progress and maybe think differently about how we approach road safety? Any takers?
Could you repeat that question, because I'm actually struggling to hear. I'm sorry. I don't know if it's just me, but
I think all of us are.
okay, good.
Where is the biggest opportunity to make gains with respect to road safety in the next few years, based on where we are in our current situation and what Nhan talked about with changing maybe some of the questions and the way we approach things?
Thank you, Brenda. I think it kind of relates to the first question about so what the consumers want, what the community wants. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to change the community demand. And it's also about the safe system, right? And the question, are we asking the right question? And I think it's a really great point from Nhan about what questions we ask. And I think we still tend to ask questions about what can we do to change the people. And I think if we, as the road safety advocates, the professionals, the experts, if we really discipline ourselves to change the way we ask the road safety problem, the question differently, what could we have done differently to the system to protect our road users? I think there's a lot more we can do, and we will reach the solutions a lot more quickly, and the funding will go to the right places that will result in deaths and injuries.
Thanks, Trika.
I would agree. I'd also say that the safe system approach and recognizing the importance of the redundancy of the system and all of the elements of the system is really going to help us make a difference. We are focused on building partnerships, on engaging a greater set of stakeholders in these conversations and in helping us to make change, to have that overall conversation. And as Chika and Nhan mentioned, in starting to talk about thinking about the system itself and how it influences the user, and recognizing that the people who use the system are going to make mistakes, that they're vulnerable, and that when we're looking at the entire system together, we can make some changes that recognize that's going to happen and protect people from fatal and serious injuries. I think we're changing the way we have this conversation, and certainly in the United States with some of the new investment that we have in our new infrastructure bill, we're changing some of the ways decisions are made and where our investments are occurring.
Great, thanks very much, Bob. So with that, I will thank our speakers one last time. Thank you, Bella, for putting together a great panel for us. So thank you, everyone. First, before the break, and then I will turn it back over. So the Vision Zero Symposium first has partnered with the Ontario Public Safety Council to bring you an inspiring all-day event on Wednesday. This is separate from the CARSP conference, and registration is still available, but it will take place in this room on Wednesday. At this symposium, you will increase your knowledge about the history and underlying principles of Vision Zero, hear about practical examples of Vision Zero programs, and learn about resources to support some of the Vision Zero work. And finally, put your knowledge into action, working through a real-life case study. So those who may be interested in attending are encouraged to attend the session on 6C. There's also a banquet Monday night. In terms of transportation, we're asking people to please arrange your ride. So if you've driven, you're going to have access to a vehicle. Reach out to some of your colleagues to see if they need a ride to the banquet Monday night. It's at Science North and it's accessible by foot. It is a 40-minute walk, but there is sidewalk access. Cars to 5-minute drive. So talking about some of those transportation choices we had early. So if you choose to carpool with someone already attending, that's great, or please book a taxi ahead of time. The taxi companies are listed in the help section of the conference app. Finally, on Tuesday is your day to arrange a lunch for some of the local restaurants and cuisine. We recommend that you come ahead and make a reservation at one of the many restaurants that are walking distance from here. And please note that the hotel restaurant here is not open for lunch. And again, in the conference app in the health section, it is the restaurants will be found. And then I think we're good for the nutrition break. There is now a nutrition break in the solarium. And you can also view the exhibits there. Thank you to all of our exhibitors. After the break, there will be 3 parallel sessions. So please check in again with the conference app for locations. And there will also be a welcoming reception this evening in the solarium from 6 to 8. So thank you for that. I'm going to turn it back over.
So just to expand on that, no problem.
The last words that I just heard on the last presentation were about values. And I would like to remind people that on Tuesday morning, Nick Ward will be speaking to us about changing traffic safety culture, which is all about values and beliefs. And so I just want to remind everybody to make sure that you come. Thank you.
So just to add to what Robin had, on some good news, all the issues with the virtual side of the conference have been figured out. There was an issue with Zoom, the engineers, we were in contact with the engineers on their side. It is now fixed, so everyone who's doing us virtually is now live. For the Feed Loop app, we suggest you download Feed Loop Go. That'll give you all the instructions and time schedules for the rest of the conference. And this is something you should have received as a link in email. The break, the nutrition break we're going to have now, we're going to keep it to about 15 minutes. So it is 4:06. So by 4:20, if we could be in the next session, just to keep things going along with just because of the delays we had today. And lastly, I'll just give you a quick reminder for this session room. So for 1A, we are in Georgian DE, which is the room right now. The 1B, which is injury prevention, is in Georgian B. 1C is in Georgian C. So the solarium for nutrition break is just out in the hall to the right. And keep to the right, you'll see a bright open area. The other boardrooms are going to be on the left across the solarium. So again, it's just after 4:05, and we can be back at about 4:20 in the different sessions. I wish you all a good rest of the day.
I'll leave it.
Because someone's recording.